Pope Leo XIV closed the leather folder and placed both hands flat on the table. It was 9:47 on a Friday evening, inside one of the smaller reception chambers on the second floor of the Apostolic Palace. "This conversation is over," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The cardinal sitting across from him had not moved in almost a full minute. The room had no windows. A single crucifix hung on the wall behind the Pope. 2 Swiss guards stood outside the closed door. Inside, only 3 people remained: the Pope, the Cardinal, and Archbishop Giovanni Battaglini, who had been asked to serve as canonical witness to what was about to happen. 5 days ago, this cardinal controlled one of the most powerful offices inside the Roman Curia. He sat on 4 separate boards. He oversaw financial disbursements worth hundreds of millions of euros annually. He had been created cardinal under Pope Benedict XVI and had survived every restructuring, every reform attempt, every change of pontificate since. Tonight, he controlled nothing. What happened inside that room on Friday the 19th of June and in the 72 hours that followed is a story that multiple Vatican officials have now confirmed to journalists across 3 different outlets. Pieces of it began leaking Saturday morning through back channels. By Monday, the full picture had emerged, and it is, by any honest measure, one of the most dramatic exercises of papal authority since Pope Leo took office 13 months ago. Before we continue, if this story keeps you watching, subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. To understand what Pope Leo did on that Friday night, you have to understand what that cardinal represented inside the system. He was not young. He was not new. He was not someone who had risen quickly or controversially. He was 73 years old, Italian, a career Vatican diplomat who had spent more than 3 decades inside the Curia. He had served under 3 different pontificates without ever being publicly questioned, publicly challenged, or publicly disciplined. Sources inside the Secretariat of State describe him in nearly identical terms. He was the man who could stop any reform with a single phone call. Another source called him the gatekeeper. A third simply said everyone owed him something. His influence was not merely administrative. It was structural. He controlled access points. He decided which proposals reached which desks. He sat on oversight committees for charitable funds that operated with minimal external scrutiny. He had built over decades a web of relationships and dependencies that made him functionally untouchable, or so he believed. Pope Leo had been watching him since February. The first concrete evidence came in early June. A routine internal audit, part of the quieter accountability infrastructure Pope Leo had been building since his first months in office, flagged unusual patterns in the disbursement records of a charitable fund linked to the Cardinal's office. The irregularities were not dramatic on their face. They were subtle payments routed through intermediary accounts in ways that obscured their final destination. Donations arriving from sources that could not be independently verified through standard channels. Amounts that did not correspond to the declared charitable purposes. The auditors, a team of 3 lay people and 1 Monsignor working under the Prefecture of the Economy, brought their preliminary findings to Archbishop Battaglini, who serves as compliance coordinator. Battaglini reviewed the data for 4 full days. He cross-referenced account numbers. He examined disbursement timing. He tracked the intermediary organizations. Then he brought it directly to the Pope. That was Tuesday, June the 16th. Pope Leo reportedly spent less than 10 minutes reviewing the summary document before asking one question, just one. How long has this been happening? Battaglini's answer, according to a source with direct knowledge of the conversation, was careful but devastating. The patterns we can confirm go back to at least 2019. but the structural conditions that enabled them may have existed much longer. The Pope said nothing for several seconds. Then quietly, "Bring me everything you can find. Every record, every transaction, every name." What followed was a 48-hour investigation conducted with extreme secrecy. Only 4 people knew it was happening: Pope Leo himself, Archbishop Battaglini, the head of the Vatican's Office of the Auditor General, and one canon lawyer from the dicastery for legislative texts, brought in to ensure procedural validity. They worked from a secure room inside the governorate building, away from the Cardinal's usual corridors. No emails were sent, no digital communications of any kind. Everything was handled on paper, physical files only, hand-delivered between offices. By Thursday evening, June the 18th, they had assembled a dossier that ran to over 200 pages. Financial records spanning 7 years. Transfer histories from 14 different accounts. Witness statements from 3 former employees of the Cardinal's office who had been quietly contacted and who agreed to speak under strict confidentiality protections. Correspondence that showed the Cardinal had personally directed the routing of funds through specific channels. The pattern was now unmistakable. The Cardinal had been diverting charitable funds, not for personal luxury. He lived modestly by Vatican standards, which is precisely why no one had looked closely before. He had been channeling money into a network of influence, payments to external consultants who performed no discernible consulting work, grants to organizations that existed primarily on paper, registered addresses that corresponded to empty offices or private residences, stipends to individuals whose only apparent function was to serve as intermediaries, creating layers of distance between the Cardinal's office and the final recipients of the funds. It was not theft in the crude sense. It was something more dangerous. It was the systematic construction of a parallel power structure inside the Church, funded by resources designated for the poor and vulnerable. Pope Leo read the final summary alone in his private study on Thursday night, according to a source who spoke with someone present the following morning. The Pope appeared to have slept very little. His eyes showed fatigue. His desk held an empty coffee cup and the 200-page dossier, closed but clearly well read. Several pages had been marked with small paper tabs, but his voice was steady. "Schedule a meeting," he told Battaglini on Friday morning at 7:15. "Tonight, 9 o'clock in the East reception room. Tell him I wish to discuss administrative matters related to the quarterly review." The Cardinal accepted the invitation without suspicion. He had met with Pope Leo several times in similar settings over the past year. This was, as far as he knew, routine. It was not routine. At 9 o'clock on Friday evening, the Cardinal arrived at the Apostolic Palace. He was escorted by a Vatican gendarme to the second-floor corridor. He found Pope Leo already seated at the table when he entered. Battaglini was standing near the far wall, holding a thick leather folder. The Pope did not stand to greet him. He did not offer pleasantries. He did not ask about health or travel or the weather in Rome. He looked directly at the Cardinal and spoke. "I know what you have been doing," the Pope said, according to 2 independent sources briefed on the exchange by different participants. "I have known for several weeks. I have the evidence in front of me, and tonight this ends." The Cardinal's expression changed. Sources describe it differently. One says he went pale, another says he simply froze, a third says his jaw tightened, visibly. What everyone agrees on is that he attempted to respond. He opened his mouth to ask a question, perhaps to express confusion, perhaps to begin a defense. Pope Leo raised one hand, palm outward. The gesture was small, but absolute. "Do not," he said. "I did not invite you here tonight to argue." Archbishop Battaglini then stepped forward and placed the dossier on the table between the two men. 214 pages, financial records, witness statements, account numbers, routing histories, dates, and amounts highlighted in yellow. The Cardinal looked at the folder. He did not open it. He did not reach for it. He stared at it as though it might disappear if he refused to acknowledge it. Pope Leo spoke again. His voice, according to both sources, was not raised. It was not angry. It was measured, almost conversational in tone. But beneath the calm surface, every word carried the unmistakable weight of absolute papal authority. Effective immediately, the Pope said, you are relieved of all curial responsibilities. Your membership on every board and commission under your purview is revoked. Your access to Vatican financial systems is terminated as of this moment. Your faculties as a cardinal are suspended pending a full canonical review. The room went completely silent. No one moved. The air conditioning hummed softly. Somewhere outside, the distant sound of a vehicle crossing the courtyard. Inside that room, nothing. The Cardinal stared at Pope Leo for what sources estimate was 15 to 20 seconds. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He looked at Battaglini, who stood motionless, and said nothing. Then, when he looked back at the Pope, you cannot do this, the Cardinal said. His voice was reportedly thin, strained, as though his throat had constricted. Not like this, not without a process, not without Pope. Leo leaned forward slightly, less than an inch, but the effect was immediate. I just did. 3 words. And with those 3 words, one of the most entrenched power structures inside the Vatican ceased to exist. What happened in that moment has not occurred inside these walls in decades. Deme went. Sitting Pope, face to face with one of the most powerful men in the Roman Curia, stripped him of everything in a single encounter. No committee, vote preceded it. No prolonged public investigation gave the Cardinal time to prepare a defense. No leaked memo allowed him to rally allies or construct a narrative. No intermediary delivered the message from a safe distance. It was surgical, it was total, and it was done in person, with the Pope looking directly into the eyes of the man he was removing. The historical parallel that several Vatican observers have drawn is to Pope Leo XIII, who reigned from 1878 to 1903. In 1885, Leo XIII confronted a powerful faction within the Curia that had been actively undermining his diplomatic outreach to the French Republic. He did not negotiate with them. He did not seek consensus. He removed 3 key figures from their positions in a single week, replacing them with loyalists who understood that papal authority was not a suggestion. The message was clear then, and it is clear now. The papacy is not a negotiation, but there is a critical difference. Leo XIII acted through official decrees, published in curial bulletins, delivered through channels, read by the affected parties in their offices. Pope Leo XIV acted in person, face-to-face, in a room with no cameras, no recording devices, and no audience beyond a single canonical witness. That is a deliberate choice, and it tells you something important about who this Pope is and how. He understands the exercise of authority. After delivering the pronouncement, Pope Leo did not dismiss the Cardinal immediately. He sat with him for another 20 minutes. Sources say the Pope spoke quietly about duty, about the meaning of service within the Church, about what the institution owes to the hundreds of millions of people who trust it with their faith, their money, and their deepest hopes. The resources of this Church, the Pope reportedly said at one point, belong to the poor. They belong to the sick. They belong to the forgotten. They do not belong to us. They were never ours to redirect. The Cardinal reportedly said very little during this portion of the conversation. He sat still. He looked at the table. At one point, he asked a practical question. Will there be a public announcement? The Pope's answer was careful. That, he said, depends entirely on you. There is a path here that preserves what can still be preserved. I suggest you take it. The implication was clear. Silence in exchange for a measure of dignity. A quiet departure, framed as voluntary health concerns, advanced age, a desire for contemplative life, rather than a public humiliation that would consume both the Cardinal and the institution. But the Cardinal made a catastrophic mistake. He left that meeting. He returned to his apartments inside the Vatican, and within 3 hours, before midnight on that same Friday, he contacted 3 other cardinals by telephone. He described the encounter. He characterized it as an overreach, a power grab, a personal vendetta by an American pope who did not understand how Rome had always worked. He asked for support. He asked for solidarity against what he called an unprecedented abuse of authority. He was building a coalition, or trying to. By Saturday morning, every one of those conversations had been reported back to the Pope's office. Not because the Pope had ordered surveillance, but because the 3 cardinals the man called had each independently decided that their loyalty lay elsewhere. Pope Leo's response was immediate, precise, and devastating in its simplicity. He instructed the Vatican press office to prepare a formal statement. Not a detailed financial accounting. The canonical process would handle that in due course. But a public confirmation that a senior cardinal had been relieved of all curial responsibilities, effective immediately pending investigation into grave financial irregularities within offices under his direction. The statement was released Saturday at noon Rome time. It contained no name, but this is Rome. Everyone knows everyone. It took less than 90 minutes for the cardinal's identity to circulate through every newsroom, every diplomatic office, every religious community in the city. Italian media broke the story before 1 o'clock. International outlets followed by evening. Vatican correspondents, who had been tracking whispers and rumors for weeks, suddenly had official confirmation. The switchboard at the Holy See press office was overwhelmed with calls. But the more significant reaction came not from journalists. It came from inside the Vatican itself. The 3 cardinals who had been contacted on Friday night, the ones the stripped cardinal had called seeking alliance, issued a joint statement Saturday afternoon. It did not defend him. It did not criticize the Pope. It did not call for due process or caution. It simply said, "We trust fully in the Holy Father's judgment and pastoral discernment. We pray for all who are affected by these developments." Read that statement carefully. It is not support for a colleague. It is abandonment. Quiet, diplomatic, carefully worded, but total and absolute. The man who had spent 30 years building a network of obligation discovered in a single day that obligation evaporates when the cost of loyalty becomes higher than the cost of silence. By Sunday morning, the Cardinal had left Vatican City entirely. He retreated to a private residence outside Rome, reportedly belonging to a family member. His office in the Curia was sealed by Vatican gendarmes. His staff, 7 people in total, were reassigned to other departments. His nameplate was removed. His access credentials were deactivated. His name disappeared from the directory of active curial officials. In less than 60 hours, a career spanning 3 decades had been erased from the functional structure of the Catholic Church. But Pope Leo was not finished. What happened next revealed something about the way this Pope thinks about power and about what he expects from the men who hold it. On Sunday evening, while the stripped cardinal was retreating from Rome and the media storm was building, Pope Leo did something that no one expected. He called Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle of Manila. The conversation lasted, according to a source close to Tagle, approximately 40 minutes. The substance of the call has not been disclosed in full, but what is known is that the Pope asked Tagle a question that went beyond the immediate crisis. "If we clean only one room," the Pope reportedly asked, "what message does that send about the rest of the house?" Tagle understood immediately. The question was not about one corrupt cardinal. It was about the system that had produced him, the structures that had enabled him, the culture that had allowed decades of financial misdirection to continue unchallenged beneath the surface of institutional respectability. The Pope was not asking whether to expand the investigation. He had already decided. He was asking how. On Monday morning, he convened a full meeting of the Council of Cardinals, the advisory body sometimes referred to informally as the Nine. The official agenda concerned ongoing reforms of curial financial oversight. But sources present in the room say the Pope opened the session with a statement that went far beyond the specific case. He stood at the head of the table. He did not sit. He looked around the room. At each cardinal in turn, then he spoke. This church will not tolerate parallel structures, not financial ones, not political ones, not personal ones. Every office that exists within this institution exists to serve. The moment any office begins serving itself, serving the ambitions or the comfort or the security of the person who holds it, that office ceases to deserve existence. No one responded. The silence was total. It lasted, according to one participant, at least 10 seconds. Then, Cardinal Fridolin Ambongo of Kinshasa broke the silence. "Holy Father," he said, "what do you need from us?" Pope Leo's answer was direct, transparency, complete and immediate. Every dicastery, every fund, every account, every external relationship that involves the movement of money, I want all of it reviewed, documented, and reported within 90 days. A comprehensive financial audit of the entire Roman Curia. 90 days, no exceptions. That directive is now underway. Sources say at least 2 additional offices have already flagged irregularities to auditors in the days since the Monday announcement. Whether those irregularities rise to the level of what was found in the stripped cardinal's files remains to be seen. But the message is unmistakable. What makes this episode fundamentally different from previous Vatican financial scandals is not the presence of corruption. The Vatican has confronted financial misconduct many times, from the Banco Ambrosiano affair that rocked the institution in the 1980s to the London property deal that led to the criminal trial of Cardinal Angelo Becciu, which concluded in 2023. What is different now is 3 things. First, the speed. From the initial audit flag to the cardinal's removal, less than 2 weeks. In Vatican terms, where processes routinely take months or years, this was lightning. Second, the directness. Pope Leo did not convene a tribunal. He did not appoint a commission. He did not leak strategically to journalists to force a resignation over time. He gathered evidence. He confirmed facts. He consulted canon law. And then he sat across from the man and told him it was over. Third, and this is perhaps the most significant, the personal nature of the confrontation. Pope Leo chose to do this himself, in person, looking the cardinal in the eye. He could have sent a letter. He could have delegated to a prefect. He could have done what popes have traditionally done, communicate through layers and channels, intermediaries that preserve the dignity of distance. He chose not to. And that choice tells you everything about what kind of pontificate this is becoming. Consider what it means to be the person in that room, not the cardinal, the pope. Consider what it requires of a man to sit across from someone he has known for over a year, someone who has smiled at him across conference tables, someone who has kissed his ring and pledged obedience, and to tell that person that their life's work inside the institution is over. Most leaders avoid that moment. They delegate it. They buffer it through process and bureaucracy and committee. They create distance between themselves and the human cost of their decisions. Pope Leo eliminated that distance entirely. He chose to carry the weight of it himself, to see the cardinal's face change, to hear his voice crack. to witness the exact moment when a powerful man realized that his power was gone. That is not cruelty. It is responsibility, the refusal to make someone else do the difficult thing that you have decided must be done. There is one final detail from that Friday night that has not been widely reported. It comes from a source who heard it second-hand, but considers it reliable. After the Cardinal left the room, Pope Leo remained seated at the table. Battaglini began gathering the documents from the dossier. He asked if there was anything else the Pope needed, any calls to make, any instructions for the morning. The Pope shook his head. Slowly, he sat in silence for what the source described as at least a full minute. His hands were still flat on the table. His eyes were focused somewhere in the middle distance. Then he spoke, quietly, almost to himself. "I did not enjoy that," Pope Leo said. "I wish it had not been necessary, but I would do it again tomorrow if it were." Battaglini reportedly nodded, said nothing. He understood what the Pope was saying. Not triumph, not satisfaction, not the pleasure of exercising power over another man. Duty, the terrible, necessary weight of doing what no one else in the institution would do. That is the image that stays, not the dramatic confrontation, not the three-word declaration of power, but the Pope sitting alone afterward in a quiet room, carrying the cost of what he had just done, because accountability is not free. It costs something to look a man in the eye and end his career. It costs something to choose justice over institutional comfort. It costs something to be the one who says enough when everyone else has learned to look away. And Pope Leo paid that cost on a Friday night in June in a room with no windows, with no audience, with no audience. The investigation continues. The canonical review is expected to take several months. Whether formal charges will be brought under canon law, whether the Cardinal will face a trial or simply accept a permanent removal, remains unclear. What is clear is that his career inside the Vatican is finished, and something else is clear, something that every official, every prelate, every functionary inside the Roman Curia now understands with a clarity they perhaps did not possess 1 week ago. This Pope does not bluff, he does not threaten, he does not posture, he does not send warnings through intermediaries. He does not give second chances to those who use the Church's resources to build personal empires. When he decides to act, he acts completely, totally, irreversibly, and he does it looking you in the eye. There is a photograph that appeared on social media Monday evening. It shows Pope Leo walking alone through the Cortile di San Damaso, the large interior courtyard of the Apostolic Palace, in the early morning light. Simple white cassock, no entourage, no aides visible. Just the Pope walking slowly across ancient paving stones as the first sunlight touched the upper walls of the surrounding buildings. The photograph was taken by a Vatican employee arriving for an early shift. It was not posed. It was not intended for publication, but it captured something that formal portraits never do. A man who carries the weight of what he has done. A man who does not celebrate the exercise of power, but accepts its necessity. A man walking alone in the quiet space between decision and consequence. That is the Pope who Rome never saw coming. The Augustinian from Chicago who speaks softly and carries absolute authority. The man who built his career not in the corridors of Vatican power, but in the parishes and seminaries of Peru, far from the politics he now commands. And that is the Pope who, according to every source who has spoken about these events, is not finished, not even close. Was this the right decision? Was Pope Leo justified in acting unilaterally, without a public process, without giving the Cardinal a formal opportunity to mount a defense before removal? Does justice, even inside the Vatican, require more than one man's judgment, regardless of how much authority that man holds? Tell us what you think in the comments below, and share this with someone who believes in accountability, because this story is far from over. The 90-day clock is ticking inside the Vatican. The auditors are working, and the next confrontation is already taking shape behind the bronze doors. You will want to have seen this one first.